May 10, 2025. People of Africa receive our greetings as always. Russia and the world. Yesterday, there was the celebration of May 9th. For Russians, May 9th is the commemoration of the victory, Nietzsche, in the Great War. It is the celebration of the memories of their martyrs, of their heroes. For Russians, May 9th represents the sacrifice of tens of millions of Soviets, now embodied by Russia. For them, May 9th is simply a date that must never be forgotten. And meanwhile, we Africans, what is our great date? What is the date that we remember? Is it during the slavery imposed by those we call the Arabs and others against a large part of sub-Saharan Africa? Is it that? What is the date? No one knows anything about it. For us Africans, is it the beginning of colonization? That is the great date we should remember. When did colonization begin? No one talks about it. In schools, in African universities, we learn about it and then it is erased. We barely skim a few chapters on the damage caused by colonization. I said a few, it doesn't even go beyond a few pages. Everything else has been erased. Yet you could fill hundreds of libraries also just with the crimes of colonization. And strangely, nothing, not a single word. Africans, our own history, and not only is it erased, but we ourselves contribute to erasing it, which is very serious. For Africans, what is the major date that should be remembered? Is it decolonization? Was Africa really decolonized? Is it decolonization? There wasn't just a change in form. And meanwhile, the countries of the East, the leaders from the East, who are trying to put an end to colonization, to completely end colonization, are being opposed by other Africans. Because for them, well, hey, you Assimi, IB, General Chiani, be careful. If you fully decolonize yourselves, if you emancipate yourselves, for us, there will be revolutions in our countries. We will lose our privileges. African leaders are calculating their own interests. That's why they are doing everything they can to fight the three leaders from the East, who, in fact, are now even suspended from the African Union. But how can this be explained? That's the least of it. Those who are fighting for the Pan-African ideology are the very ones who find themselves suspended today because they are harming, they are causing trouble. For the masters, people of Africa, if we look closely, why do the Russians celebrate? They say they are paying tribute to their great men. What is the day in Africa on which we pay tribute to our heroes, to our martyrs? What is that day in Africa? Each country has tried to establish its own day. Even then, it's celebrated in secret, you know? They lay a bouquet of flowers and that's it. That's it. And even then, that's in countries where at least they make an effort. In some countries, you don't even dare mention the ideas of the martyrs. All the well-known crimes committed by the colonizers are covered up. In many African countries, people don't dare. It's absurd. It's simply a disappointment. The Russians say they also celebrated this day because the special operation currently underway against Zelensky is against the neo-Nazis. And that the Second World War, it was because of the neo-Nazis that they lost millions of lives. But tell me, colonization, which caused thousands, even millions of deaths in Africa, doesn't the same form still continue today in Africa? Setting Africans against each other, the plundering of Africa's resources. What has changed? In reality, nothing has changed. The same reasons, they said the same disasters. You know, even the Palestinians commemorate what is called the Nakba, a day of catastrophe. But what is that day of catastrophe in Africa? They washed us. There was a brainwashing. This is what Victor Hugo called civilizing the Africans. And Africans really let themselves get caught up in that. Since the so-called French Revolution, which was a monarchy and where they guillotined the king, they say they gave themselves a constitution. They also tell Africans, their former colonies, to give themselves a constitution, as if we didn't have a charter of our own. The Charter of Kuruk and Fuga predates it. more than 6 centuries before France's so-called constitution. But we're told, no, no, no. Adopt the models of their constitution, so that all of France's former colonies have constitutions that are copy-pasted from France's 1958 constitution. And in the name of this constitution, we have to wage war against each other, oppress each other, neutralize each other, mistreat each other. When are we going to break free from these frameworks that were designed or at least imagined by them, supposedly to civilize us? Everything that worked for them or every model they established, we too fight in the name of those things. Well, it's simply a disappointment. The Russians celebrated this day with great pomp because, as they say, I did a show with our colleague Michael, who just returned from Indochina. They understood that the opposing camps, meaning the Westerners, want to falsify history. They want people to believe that it wasn't the Russians, the Soviet Union, who won. Do you understand what I mean? But it was the Allied forces led by and the Americans, and it was they who destroyed the power of the German army, who took prisoner a German field marshal and generals. Several German officers. It was they who neutralized Adolf Hitler, and no one else who was the central figure of that war. It was the Russians who neutralized him. But now it feels like they want to rewrite history. Tell me, is African history also being rewritten or not? Everything that has been invented today, it's others who are now claiming to be, in any case, to hold the copyright, the patents, to be considered the main inventors, while the rest of us, all of our great civilization, even the famous democracy. The famous democracy, according to history, actually came to Egypt. It was after his stay in Egypt that he returned to Greece and wanted to replicate that model in Greece. But today they say, no, democracy was born in Greece, plain and simple. Everything was reversed by their ancestors. The sports, the Olympic Games they talk about, but those were originally Egyptian. And those Egyptians were Africans just like you and me. Everything has been turned upside down, and Africans do nothing to set the record straight. Meanwhile, Africans are fighting among themselves. Some call themselves rebels, others call themselves jihadists, others terrorists, all to fight other Africans for the interests of the imperialists. You know, when people say Babema Traoré lost to the colonizers, no, it wasn't the French troops who defeated Babema. It was black people from many countries who were brought together. There were thousands of them. The history of the Tirailleur was first about being used against other Africans. But when the Malagasy people staged their revolution in 1947, if I remember correctly, who crushed that revolution? It wasn't the French army as such. The Malagasy had taken control of the French army camps. It was Africans, Tirailleurs, who were called Senegalese riflemen. But that's what happened. That's what happened. It's Africans fighting Africans, but the victory is credited to the colonial armies. When will Africans understand? Now the Russians are calling on the whole world to put things back into context. May 9th for Africans, it's also about seeing that Zelensky had threatened to attack. But the Russians neutralized the entire attack on May 6th, that is 3 days earlier. They were deterred, and they also understood that the retaliatory measures could be very severe. Today, which African country is capable of militarily deterring these colonial powers? There isn't any. And willingly, African countries continue to outsource their defense and security issues to the same colonizers. Wait, what do we have? Is it a curse, or what exactly is the problem? What have we done? I don't know. To God in this world, what have we done ourselves? What exactly is happening to us? The colonizers, it's as if you were asking Ukrainians today, let's put it this way, to outsource their security to the Russians. It's like asking Americans to outsource their security to the Chinese, or the Chinese to outsource their security to the Russians, well, to the Americans. That's just not done. is like asking the French to accept Russian military bases. But in that case, they thought that it's the Russian interest that would be prioritized in France. And they would never accept that. So why should we Africans have to accept bases of the French colonial army in our own countries? Why? And you even find African leaders who try to make excuses for this, even for the CFA. But what excuse do we have? And France still acts as the spokesperson for many African countries. Would France, even as part of a union with Germany, ever accept Germany being its spokesperson? On what grounds? Given their history, is that even possible? Africans have been taught to forget history. And we see some so-called African intellectuals saying, we're not in history, we're in the present. But every country in the world works with its history. The Chinese work with their history. The French, the Americans, the Japanese still have their emperor. Africans are being told to live without their history. And some Africans have been conditioned, those who call themselves African intellectuals, who try to foster this hatred. They want to reduce Africa's problems to a question of democracy. But how many countries in the world don't care about Western democracy and live better than Westerners? Democracy, they say, is just one way of governing. But if that's the case, then every country should have its own form of democracy. The way I dress isn't necessarily the way Daudas, Sambas, or Juniors dress. Everyone has their own way of being in this world. So why should we be asked to behave, to reduce our existence to that of a young French woman? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up. It doesn't hold up. Well, to go even further, much further, we're made to believe that democracy started in Africa in the 1990s. But Africa, if democracy is the rule of the majority, Africa has it in its DNA. But here, it's Western democracy that we've adopted, that has been imposed. The liberal democracy that has been imposed on my country since the 1990s. That's the problem, because it doesn't work here. Multi-party politics doesn't fit with us, with our cultural realities. We are countries that have many, what they call ethnic groups, but what we call communities. Because ethnic group is a bit pejorative. We have countries where there are maybe 60 languages. But with 60 languages, when you want to implement multi-party politics, well, it's going to be I'm not sure what to call it, let's say. They will politicize our communities. They will politicize our societies. Everyone will line up behind, I don't know, a political leader with whom they share the same geographic area. That is to say, we're from the same region. That's how we end up with issues of northerners and southerners. And Africa is not prepared to counter that. Where people will say, well, listen, Henry Konabedi is Baule or whatever. So line up behind him. Gbagbo is Bete, so line up behind him. Ouattara is Dioula, so line up behind him. Guillaume Soro is Dioula, spend part of your life with him. We end up creating community-based parties instead of common political parties. And that's still war. Multi-party politics is not suited to the socio-cultural realities in Africa. And I see some Malians saying, we are marching in the name of multi-party politics. You have 399 political parties in Mali, 299 active political parties, 297 active. But with all that, where are we headed? But it's just to tear Mali apart. That's exactly what happened to us last time. Fortunately, the leaders understood very early on, these things need to stop. Multi-partyism and all that, it needs to end. Legally, it has to be brought to an end. We say that the principle of democracy is sovereignty, right? Which African country is truly sovereign? Which one is truly sovereign? If you are not sovereign, you do not have democracy. Because in that case, it's the will of another country being imposed on you. And at least to the Africans who are sovereign. That's why you have Paul Biya in power since before some of us were even born. And yet they tell Africans that this is democracy. But in reality, it's France's will that prevails as long as they have the oil. Gabon has never been a democracy but for you. It's all fine. Who doesn't want to understand what? Leon Mba, who was he? He was France's lackey. After Leon Mba, his chief of staff, Omar Bongo, who was he? Another lackey. When he died, his son took over. Ali Bongo, who is he? Another lackey. After Ali Bongo, Olengi Nguema, who is also from the Bongo family. What do you want? What do you want? But they're all the same. You know, Olengi. Nguema himself goes to Paris. There, it's not a problem. In any case, I appreciated his speech where he said they are his brothers in arms. Africans are starting to understand, but we need to surpass ourselves. The problem of Asemo is not a problem of democracy. Otherwise, the imperialists, the Westerners, would never do business with the Saudis, the Qataris, who invest massively in their countries and are anything but a democracy. Dubai is one of the most sought-after cities in the world. Everyone goes there. And is Dubai a matter of democracy? Abu Dhabi, over there, is that a democracy? It's far from being a question of democracy. For us Africans, we need to learn which days we should remember in our history, the sad days. When was slavery? What about colonization? Neocolonialism, which still continues. They simply erased our history and we helped them do it. It's up to us to rewrite African history and the true history. And for that, we must be victors. Otherwise, it will always be the victors who write history for the vanquished. Are we victors or vanquished? For now, we are among the ranks of the vanquished. It's up to us to reverse the trend and become victors. People of Africa, we hope to see you again tomorrow for another top news topic. Our work is to continue not only to inform, but also to raise awareness, as we have done in this program. See you tomorrow for another top news topic. Thank you.